Alex, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Jen. First off, the Vice President's office just announced that she'll be visiting the border Friday. What can you tell us about the visit? And you have in the past defended the decision not to visit the border by anyone, really, by President Biden or Vice President Harris. So what's behind the sort of change of course?
Sure. First, I think many of you may have seen it, but just to reiterate the specific details, the Vice President will travel to El Paso, Texas on Friday. She will be accompanied by Department of Homeland Security Secretary Allen Mayorkas. Earlier this year, as you all know, the President asked the Vice President to oversee our diplomatic efforts to address the root causes of migration from El Salvador to Guatemala and Honduras. And as a part of this work, she recently traveled to Guatemala and Mexico last month to have those discussions. And this trip to the border on Friday will be a part of this effort. I will note that I've also said here from this podium, and she has also said that when it was the right time, she may go to visit the border. And so this trip on Friday, which is being done in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Mayorkas is, of course, joining her on this trip. And the planning and timing of it was done in coordination with them, is part of the coordinated effort between her office, her work, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services, to continue to address the root causes and work in coordination to get the situation under control.
Sure. And then on voting rights, the President's statement yesterday said he'll have more to say on this next week. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a sense of what we should expect from the President on voting rights? And you also have said that there are other avenues for protecting voting rights. What do those look like? Then I'm going to take another stab at this. I know you've been asked this 5 different ways, but does the President believe that defending the filibuster is worth more and more important than protecting voting rights?
Well, first let me say, as the Vice President said yesterday, and I'll just reiterate, the fight to improve and expand access to voting is far from over. And the President, as he noted in his statement yesterday, and as you just touched on, will be speaking to this next week. And this is a continuation of his efforts to use the bully pulpit to elevate this issue, as he did just last week when he marked Juneteenth, and also as he did in Tulsa, Oklahoma, just a few weeks before that. So I expect we'll have more to preview as we get closer, but I can tell you that what you should expect to hear from him is that there are many ways to work across the country with activists, with states, with legislators, using every lever at our disposal to expand access, improve access to voting for people across the country. He'll talk about some of the ways that he wants to continue to do that. He'll also reiterate his view that it's a fundamental right, and that people across the country should be able to exercise that, to decide who they want to be their mayor, who they want to be their congressman, who they want to be their president. And everybody who supports democracy, who supports equality, who supports justice, should be supporting improvements to our voting rights laws.
And one more last one on this conversation around crime. How should the American people measure success for President Biden on crime? Should they be looking for a reduction in crime in their localities, or, I mean, what exactly is he aiming for in announcing these new policies today?
Well, that certainly is the goal, of course. But I would say, Alex, that what the President has watched closely is that there has been, of course, an increase in violent crime, gun violence specifically in a lot of communities, over the last 18 months. He's obviously taken a number of steps over the past couple of months to work to address that. This is a continuation of that in his view. And part of that is empowering local police communities and making sure that local communities have the funding they need to support efforts by the local police. It also means taking steps to address the prevalence of gun violence across the country. So, of course, his objective is to take steps he can do as the President of the United States, using the tools he has at his disposal to empower local communities, get them the resources they need, and ensure we're putting laws in place that reduce gun violence. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the Vice President will be doing at the border? Is she visiting a detention center or a facility for migrant children? And how much access will the press have to whatever sites she tours while she's there?
They're all great questions. Obviously, they just made this announcement. I'm sure they will have more details to share with you. I just don't have any more to share with you at this particular moment on what she'll be doing specifically there.
Okay. And then can you tell us a little bit more about this decision for the U.S. to seize website domains used by Iranian state TV? What led to that decision and why now?
It's a Department of Justice decision and action, so I'd point you to them.
Is there any concern that this could hamper negotiations over Iran's nuclear program?
We are still at the point, and in those discussions, we just finished the sixth round. Obviously, all of the negotiators are back in their capitals, having discussions as is appropriate. We see advantage to us in moving toward a diplomatic solution. We hope others who have seats at the table do as well. But again, this was an action by the Department of Justice, not coordinated with other aspects of our negotiations.
And then what can you tell us about the talks that took place on the Hill yesterday over the bipartisan infrastructure proposal? Were those fruitful discussions, and where does that go from here? Is the president going to be hosting any of those senators here at the White House in the coming days?
If we continue to make progress in these discussions, then the president looks forward to welcoming members to the White House before the end of the week. We'll see. There were two rounds of discussions yesterday, and I know you're all aware of this, or many of you cover this closely, but there was one in the afternoon. There was another one last night. Additional progress was made last night. This afternoon, Steve Ricchetti, Louisa Terrell, Brian Deese are all back up on the Hill right about now, having continued discussions about the path forward. That's one track where we are moving forward on these bipartisan negotiations, and we assess as we conclude each round what the next step should be. So again, if we make progress and if we assess that it is the appropriate time to bring these officials, these elected officials to the White House, the president looks forward to doing that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. So about today's announcement, why is the vice president visiting the border this week when earlier this month she dismissed a trip like that, saying it would be a grand gesture?
She also said in an interview with NBC that she would be open to going to the border if it was an appropriate time. She said that after she said that. So that's important context as well.
And important context, I've got the NBC interview right here. She was talking about how she hasn't been to the border, she hasn't been to Europe either. So does she think that these two things are the same?
And again, Peter, I think she also said in the same interview that she would be open to going to the border at an appropriate time. And what I'm conveying to you is that, as a part of her assignment, she has, of course, hosted a number of bilateral engagements. She's visited the Northern Triangle. She's made a number of announcements about how to address root causes that she was going to assess with the Department of Homeland Security and with the administration when it was the appropriate time to go. And I will note that we're at this point in part because we've made a great deal of progress. And if you look just to a couple of months ago, when 6,000 children were in Border Patrol facilities, we're now at the point where there's far less than 1,000. If you look to just a couple of months ago, when there were children who were waiting in Border Patrol facilities for more than 100 hours, and they were certainly overcrowded, now it's less than 30 hours. In April, there were 22,000 kids in HHS facilities, and now that number is 14,000. Is there still more work to do? Absolutely. That's the purview of Secretary Mayorkas, but it's important every component of our government is coordinated.
Was it important for the White House to have her seen at the border before former President Trump has a trip there next week?
We made an assessment within our government about when it was an appropriate time for her to go to the border.